The Red Barn. An infamous tale of betrayal, murder, and supernatural revenge. The tale of the Red Barn murder encompasses treacherous double lives, a vengeful ghost, a book made of human skin, and a hanging so popular that tickets had to be issued. The true events took place in 1828 in the small rural village of Polstead in Suffolk, England. The tale became so popular that the village became a ghoulish tourist attraction at the time, with several 100,000 visitors descending on it 1 year alone. Across the country, fairground peep shows created new apertures for visitors to watch a grisly reenactment of the murder. Planks of wood were stolen by visitors to the Red Barn, and pieces of rope used to hang the murderer were sold for a guinea. A lock of the murdered woman's hair was sold for 2 guineas. Part of the killer's scalp and 1 ear were placed on display in a shop in the busiest retail street in London, Oxford Street, and tiny pieces of the Red Barn were sold as toothpicks. The story features an unmarried woman, Maria Martin, who'd had several children out of wedlock, something quite scandalous in those days, that even led to arrest. And it was a situation which often led to destitution and desperate existence, with some women in this position trying to do all they could to make a better life and marry well. Few would succeed, however, as once in this position of illegitimacy, eligible men would not want to involve themselves. The saga began when Maria suddenly vanished and her father began receiving letters from her, telling him she had moved to the Isle of Wight with a local farmer's son to start a new life. Her father couldn't understand why she wouldn't have told him this, but she sounded happy and settled there with William Foxy Corder, although it was Corder who penned the letters rather than Maria. As Corder explained in the letters that Maria had hurt her hand or was temporarily under the weather, or when her father asked him why she did not write directly herself, he explained that her letters must surely have gotten lost in the post. Then, after a few months had passed, with the letters still continuing, her father's wife, Maria's stepmother, Anne, began to have very unsettling dreams in which she saw her husband's daughters dead and buried in an outdoor building that in her visions looked very much like a local barn called the Red Barn. She was having very vivid and very realistic visions of her stepdaughter dead in the barn. So vivid that she felt these were not dreams at all, but visitations by the ghost of her stepdaughter, who was communicating with her, showing her where she had been killed and buried. The nightly visitations by the ghost so disturbed her stepmother that in the end she confided in her husband and told him they must go to the Red Barn, that if they did, they would find his daughter dead. Her father agreed to this to soothe and pacify his wife, and soon a dig of the Red Barn began. It was not long before the body of his daughter was indeed unearthed in the Red Barn. Anne Martin would later testify in court about the visitations of her stepdaughter's ghost, which had led to the digging up of the Red Barn. When her body was found, Maria was recognizable from her clothes and her hair and the gap in her teeth, although decomposition had set in. Tied around her neck was one of William's handkerchiefs. She had not been in the Isle of Wight then, despite the letters all written by Foxy Corder. Local farmer's son, William Corder, had been given the nickname Foxy when in school due to his reputation for sharp intelligence, but slyness too, and local gossip had it that he did not necessarily always act within the boundaries of the law. It was said that he tried to pass a forged check and had sold his father's pigs without the required license. In fact, how much was really true isn't known, but it was believed that when younger, his father had sent him to London to join the Navy. Due to poor eyesight, however, he failed the entry test. Rather than returning home to his village in Suffolk, Corder attempted to make a living in London and became involved with a petty gang of criminals, including prostitute Hannah Fandango, who came from the same village, and the leader of a gang, a man called Beauty, but legally named Sam Smith. Corder's attempts to live by crime was unsuccessful, however, and he returned to the village when his father agreed he could come back. Shortly after this, during a hard winter, his father and two of his brothers became ill with tuberculosis. The two brothers recovered only just and were permanently disabled by the effects of the devastating disease, while his father succumbed to it and died. The eldest son, who had been unaffected, now inherited the farm. It was around this time that Maria Martin caught William's eye. He was known to be a ladies' man and a woman chaser, and Maria in some respects had a similar reputation. Although in those days, of course, she was greatly stigmatized as a fallen woman of wanton behavior. She'd actually already had an illegitimate child by Corder's own brother Thomas. This had been hushed up, and the infant had died too, as was common in an era of such poverty and harsh living conditions. Maria then had a second illegitimate child, born by a relationship with the son of landed gentry. This man's social position was higher than William's, and again the affair was hushed up, although the child's father, Peter Matthews, did send monthly payments for her for the child's upkeeping, as long as she agreed to stay out of his life. Her next affair had been with William Corder, the man who had written the letters to her father from the Isle of Wight. Of course, she had not been in the Isle of Wight, and he had only been there momentarily, long enough to write the letters and post them. Then she was found dead in the Red Barn, and he turned up in London town again, living with another woman. He'd met this new woman after placing an advert in the Lonely Heart section of the Times paper, while Maria lay undiscovered and buried under the Red Barn. Maria and Corder's affair had been a low-key relationship, kept mostly secret from the village. They'd met at secluded and isolated spots only, including the Red Barn. Once more, Maria had fallen pregnant, and as the pregnancy progressed, she was unable to keep it a secret. William said he would marry her once the child was born, at least according to Maria's father. In fact, the child died 3 weeks after he was born. William and Maria then decided to bury the child in secret. At the time, Maria could have faced a public whipping for the crime of having children out of wedlock. Indeed, one day, William came to her and urged her to leave the village. He said he'd heard rumors that the parish officers were planning to have her arrested. Or were they? William Dudley arranged that they must meet at the Red Barn and run away together and get married. Then Dudley ran off. Days later, William returned home. He told her father that there had been an issue with the marriage license and that she was waiting in Ipswich for it to be sorted out. William was now running the farm. His elder brother had recently died by drowning when he'd fallen through ice as he tried to cross the lake. William remained at the farm for a number of weeks, then informed Maria's father that he would be traveling to the Isle of Wight, where he said Maria had gone. Days later, her father began to receive letters from his daughter, written, little did he know, by William, not Maria. The first letter informed her father that the couple had now married and that William was going to sell the farm and set up a new business on the Isle of Wight. That winter was when Anne Martin, Maria's stepmother, started to find her night times besieged by the ghost of her stepdaughter, imploring her to go to the Red Barn. The dreams at night were so realistic that Anne became convinced Maria was buried under the floor of the Red Barn, situated on the land of William's farm. Her husband, who incidentally had a rather curious profession of making a living by catching moles and turning them into gloves, agreed to find out. He went to the man running the farm in William's absence and asked her permission to enter the Red Barn. With him went Maria's stepmother, and she led them to a precise spot inside the barn. Suspiciously, at this spot, the ground looked as though it had been disturbed. Maria's father used one of his mole-catching spikes and struck it into the ground. When he pulled it back out, decomposing flesh was attached to it. A witness would later come forward to say they'd seen William walking toward the barn with a pickaxe in his hand. How she died could not be determined, but obviously the prime suspect was William. He was discovered by police in London. He was living with the woman he'd met through the Lonely Hearts column of the Times newspaper and was helping her run a boarding house for young ladies. Other accounts say it was a girls' school, and in fact, he'd married her. His new wife was a former school teacher. However, police discovered a passport in his name along with plans to travel alone to France. The police believed he was plotting to leave the country before Maria's body ended up being found. He had pistols too. London policeman James Lea gained access to William's new residence by pretending to be the father of a daughter he wished to board there. William was arrested and taken away. When he was arrested, he denied all knowledge of his former lover's murder. Word soon spread of this discovery of the woman in the Red Barn and the accused man, and the public became gripped as the newspapers described the grisly and scandalous details of the couple. With its heady mix of illicit love, murder, and supernatural messages, hundreds attended her funeral. At the murder trial, they even struggled to find suitable jurors who had not already read about all the juicy details in the newspapers and formed their opinion of William's guilt. The huge number of people wishing to attend the trial led to every hostelry in the town being fully booked, and tickets had to be issued for attendees in order to ensure crowding did not become a safety issue. The prosecution sought to persuade the jury that William had wanted rid of Maria and her damaged reputation, and they painted an image of him as a black sheep and criminal. Because of his past associations, they suggested that Maria had been blackmailing him, and that in a desperate effort to be free of her, he had shot, then stabbed her to death. Maria's brother gave evidence that he knew William's gun was loaded before Maria had disappeared. She had been shot in the cheek. William said she had accidentally been shot in the eye as she was changing out of men's clothes. He'd told her to dress up as a man to elude parish police who may be out looking for her to arrest her for her crime of bearing illicit children. However, she had also been stabbed in the ribs, unless that would have been caused by her father's mole-catching implement when he'd struck her in the ground perhaps. However, There was also a stab wound on her neck. She'd also quite possibly been strangled too, presumably with William's handkerchief found still tied around her neck. Certainly it looked like overkill, a crime of passion. Had they argued terribly and things had escalated? Or could even someone else have put William in the frame? There were rumors, unproven of course, and perhaps wicked gossip. But the rumors were that Maria's stepmother, who was only a couple of years older than Maria, had developed feelings for William. On the other hand, the defense team claimed that Maria had killed herself after arguing with William and that he had merely panicked and hidden her body. The jury took just over half an hour to find him guilty, and the judge ordered him to be hung until dead. While awaiting the death sentence to be carried out, William made a confession. He said he had killed Maria, but this had been a tragic accident. He said he had shot her by accident when she was changing out of the men's clothes. He said he did not stab her. It was too late now, however. He'd already been condemned to die. He was put to death in front of an enormous crowd, estimated at up to 20,000 people, who had all clamored to watch. Once he was dead, his body was left hanging on the scaffold for a while for people to look at. Then he was transported to the county hall, where he was put on display with his stomach cut open for some reason. Thousands queued to view him. The hangman sold off pieces of the rope used to hang him. The Red Barn was eventually pulled down, but not before many curious members of the public had traveled there to steal pieces of the barn as souvenirs. William's body was used for a dissection demonstration to medical students, while his skull was either stolen or sold, ending up in the hands of a Dr. John Kilner, who had also one of his ears. The story goes that after the doctor took ownership of the skull, any candles in the same room would never stay lit. They would constantly be snuffed out somehow. Dr. Kilner was a general practitioner, and one evening his maid told him a man had come for a late appointment at the surgery. Now, this is when things get a little paranormal. When the doctor left his office and went into the waiting room to ask the man to come into his office to see him, the room was empty. Yet he felt the distinct sensation of a shadow in the dark room, as if a presence was there. He inquired from his maid if she had imagined a man had called at the front door, because the room was now empty. But she insisted she had let a man in. Puzzled, the doctor shrugged it off and went back to his office. A few days later, he watched his door handle turn when he was quite alone in the house. Determined to find out who was behind the door, he rushed to open it, but found the hallway empty. He made his way to the front door, but on opening it, he was assaulted by a violent gust of wind that nearly knocked him off his feet. After a number of continued unsettling, spooky incidents, he decided to rid himself of the skull, convinced that, although a skeptic and rational scientist, that the spirit of the hanged man was haunting him. He took the skull and gave it to the jailer where William had been hung, who, it is said, also went on to experience bad luck and ill fortune. Eventually, the skull was taken to a priest, and it was given a proper Christian burial. Dr. Kilner had also taken possession of William's scalp, which had come attached to one of his ears, but this eventually ended up at Suffolk's Moses Hall Museum, along with a curious display of a book written about an account of the murder, which had been bound with William's skin. The story lived on for many decades, with plays, ballads, and poems all written of the tale, and many melodramatic newspaper stories entertaining audiences in true Penny Dreadful style. So there is that story, and this one is a true story. What do you guys think of this? Give me your opinions down in the comments. Thank you guys for coming and listening to this crazy story. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.